Welcome to the Cumbria Chamber of Commerce podcast, your weekly update of business news and issues from around Cumbria. Find out how we support new business and help existing businesses to grow and flourish at cumbriachamber.co.uk. Now here's the Chamber's Business Engagement Manager, Julian Whittle, with this week's episode.
Hello, I'm here with Sheila Gregory, Chief Executive of Carlisle Mencap, to explore how businesses can care for customers and employees who are on the autistic spectrum. Sheila, around 1 in 100 people in the UK have been diagnosed with autism. That's a big potential audience of customers for businesses, and also a big potential pool of labour from which they can recruit. So I wondered if we could start by exploring what in practical terms does being autistic, having the condition, what does it mean?
Well, autism is lifelong. It's not something that goes away or can be cured. It's a developmental disability that affects how people perceive the world and interact with the world and other people. So they see, hear and feel the world differently to other people. So it can affect people in different ways. It's called a spectrum. We talk about autistic spectrum. A spectrum conditions. So some people will have certain difficulties and other people will have other difficulties, affect them in different ways. Some people on the spectrum have learning disabilities. Mencap, we work with a lot of people with learning disability. Some people have mental health issues. Other people have different issues. Many people are of high intelligence and they're on the spectrum. They might have something like Asperger's syndrome, which you may have heard of. So there's a big variety of ways it shows itself, but there are things in common. A lot of that is how they see the world, and the world feels very overwhelming, so people nearly always have some form of anxiety. So you might have anxiety about relating to other people. So that could be difficult in either a customer situation or a worker situation.
Easily,
You might find, office politics a bit difficult. Sometimes people struggle to communicate. Some people that I work with don't communicate in spoken at all. Some find it difficult. Sometimes they find the social norms very difficult to deal with. So they wouldn't always know how to deal with a situation. Something like where we would sort of have to go to sort of how to deal with it. Perhaps a colleague's been bereaved. How to deal with that?
It's difficult for anybody, isn't it?
But we sort of know that we have to do. They might not. So that might mean they're misunderstood. People don't look disabled. Some people might think, oh, why is that person behaving like that? So with children, I work a lot with children. They're often put down as naughty, but people still have issues around social communication, which is where people perhaps in a shop or an office meeting, people coming in need to understand that a person with autism might have difficulties interpreting both their verbal and their non-verbal language. Things like tone of voice or gesture, they might not understand. So you might be making a joke and being sarcastic, and they might think you're in earnest. And, take it the wrong way. So facial expressions are difficult to understand, tone of voice, jokes and sarcasm. We all do sarcasm. People with autism might not understand. They might think we're being nasty. They take things literally. So if you say, take a chair, take a seat, you might pick the seat up and carry it away. You've got to be, to be aware that you've got to be literal and straightforward. Socially, they do find it difficult to read others. They might make mistakes about people's intentions. They might appear to be insensitive. People with autism aren't insensitive. There's a huge myth goes around about saying that they can't understand how others feel. It's just more difficult for them to get through to that.
I see.
They can get overloaded. So in a big noisy room, it might just be too much. We all know it's in a big noisy room, it's difficult. They're trying to wade their way through all those senses and the noise, and it can be difficult, so they might shut down. They might not want other people to touch or comfort them because they might misunderstand. They might appear to behave strangely. They might have routines that they follow that we think are unusual. They might be repetitive. They might have a daily routine, and a daily routine about which route you take to work. If you're driving to work, you always want to drive that route and the road's closed. It's a nuisance, isn't it? But for someone with autism, that might be a really serious, serious thing. They want to do the thing in the right way. That's the way they always do it.
According to the National Autistic Society, 79% of people on the spectrum feel socially isolated, and 64% avoid going to the shops. Now, that's prompted the Society to launch the Too Much Information campaign. Explain what this is.
Well, one of the issues for people with autism is that they can experience over or under sensitivity to a variety of things. So that could be sounds, touch, taste, smells, lights, colours, temperatures, pain. They might find that background sounds upset them, they try to block them out. So going out to the shops or the theatre or the pub, it can be quite a difficult experience for them because they're overly sensitive to things that are around them. So the Autism Hour, as far as I understand, is about providing an environment where people can feel comfortable. I know that the cinemas have autism-friendly cinema nights.
Right. How do they differ then from a conventional screening?
The lights don't go down.
Yeah.
It feels safer.
Yeah.
They don't do the adverts because people can't find that interruption. Remember, they're concentrating and they're trying to block out all these confusions. And suddenly you have an advert. So you run it without the adverts. It's quiet. The lights don't go down. Theatre in the Lake does autism-friendly performances, which follow that sort of pattern as well. Not too crowded, not too noisy, not as many people. But, in a much more context of not so much sensory overload.
Yeah.
It's sensory overload.
Yeah.
So that's what it's about. So people might avoid going to the shops because it's too busy. I mean, for instance, one of the training films that we used to use was about a couple going to shop in America. You imagine shops in America, they're absolutely full of colour, noise, smells, and they just want to buy cornflakes, and it's about 40 types of cornflakes, which is so confusing because, we're trying to process all this information because processing is one of the issues.
Yeah.
They take a longer time to process. And what they did was, which a lot of people do, they played music so they could hear their music so they couldn't hear anything else. And they actually wore glasses that cut the colours down.
Oh, right. It's fascinating. So, I mean, as part of the campaign, the Society is encouraging shops and businesses to organise an Autism Hour. Now, Barton's Yard in Carlisle, which is a sort of restaurant and bar within the Holston Apart Hotel, they've been doing this. What did it involve?
I didn't actually go to it, but I imagine that they cut out a lot of the sensory stuff, background music, lighting, not too much noise.
They even turned the coffee machine off.
Turned the coffee machine, because people can be affected by noises from coffee machines or lights, fluorescent lighting. Yeah. Although they probably wouldn't be able to organise even what people wear or even the walls. You can't actually change the colour of the walls for an hour, but in our buildings where we care for the children, we have autism-friendly colouring, which is not
bright colours, is it?
Not too bright. Greens, blues, like burnt orange. Not magnolia because it's a bit boring, but not too patterned.
Oh, I see.
Not too confusing, so people can see through. See what they're looking at rather than being confused by a whole load of things. Because the person with autism has to actually process. We all do it, actually. Every time we enter a room, we process what we see. So we know there's a cupboard over there and a filing cabinet and a blue floor and an orange wall and some cards on that. We see that immediately. A person with autism has to actually process all that data before they can understand it. So the more you have to process, the more difficult it comes, and then you can get overloads.
Yeah.
And this is where you get people melting down and becoming distressed and possibly doing things that we don't expect, crying, shouting out.
Yeah.
And so what they're doing in Autism Hours is that they're trying to cut back on that overload. So that could be music, could be things, it could be lighting. The police were discussing this at one point about possibly taking the fluorescent jacket off.
Yeah.
If a person's becoming distressed, or not only distressed, but sometimes obsessed by the particular thing.
Oh, I see.
And so they can't concentrate on something else.
Yeah. No, because the Autism Hour is a one-off initiative. I think Barton's Yard ran it for an hour a day for a week. But I was wondering, what can businesses do on a permanent basis? And I'm thinking here mainly of retailers and hospitality businesses like Barton's Yard. What can they do on a permanent basis to cater for customers who are on the spectrum?
They could have an Autism Hour every week. Or they could think about just cutting down on the sensory clutter, because there's an awful lot of people, as well as people with autism, who do struggle to process what's going on around them, and that would include generally people with learning disability, people with dementia, who are all struggling to process what they see. So the more you shove in people's faces, the more difficult it is to process. You might simplify things. You might think of advertising, and I think supermarkets in America regularly have an autism shopping time.
Really? Right, yeah.
That's
a good idea.
So you could do it at a particular time, a quiet time, because that would suit the shop, because you don't want to do it at a busy time. But the people with autism don't want to come at the busy time either. They want to come at the quiet hour, when the lights are up, the background music's off, and the staff have some awareness of who's coming in. We take away all the extraneous things that we don't need in the way of advertising. We just need what we need, and not extra.
Okay. Now, it's equally important that businesses make provision for autistic employees. I mean, there's a legal obligation to do that, isn't there, under the Equality Act, to make reasonable adjustments. I think it's the legal phrase for people with disabilities. And, of course, there's self-interest in doing so, because autistic people sometimes have exceptional skills, don't they? Yes,
and a lot of people are really into particularly things around computing, so they can be really, really good. They can concentrate really, really well. So a lot of people with autism can copy and draw things accurately. There was a chappie who made a fortune, I think he's called Stephen Wiltshire, who made a fortune out of going up in a helicopter and drawing corporate headquarters in London.
Yeah.
20 years ago, they used to take, and he would do it, the corporate picture from his head, because they can remember and retain, because they obviously become very interested in certain aspects. So anything to do with design, anything to do with computing, anything that a lot of concentration, person with autism is going to do it, because they're busy cutting out the rest of the world.
Yeah, and they concentrate on one thing.
Yeah, the one thing. Yeah. Quite often they're highly focused. They have interests, and this is something where employers can find it very useful. You get a lot of people who are really good at certain things, often technical stuff, or artistic stuff. We do a lot of work with young disabled people who are artistic. We make films, and we do artistic projects, and quite often we have some really highly talented people who are on the spectrum who can do things. So quite often you might find someone who's interested in computers and will be really good as a programmer or something, might be on the spectrum. So you're using their talents, basically. I mean, there's some very famous people who are on the spectrum. Bill Gates, Chris Packham, see him on the television now. He's very passionate about his wildlife. David Bellamy, if you go back a bit further, and you think about David Bellamy, how passionate he was about his plants. He was on the spectrum. So, all those people are highly clever and have been highly successful, and they've really concentrated on the particular interests that they have. So you might get people who are really going to stick in at doing something. Once they get something they enjoy doing, they're going to stick in and be a good worker or a good volunteer if they're volunteering. But to be with reasonable adjustments, you need to have some kind of autism awareness among the staff. They don't need to be experts, but they need to know that person might not react in the same way as everybody else. So thinking about things about using English in a way that's easy to understand, being aware that people might not socially react in the same way as other people, and not to be offended, not to use those complicated words or those sayings that people don't understand. Be aware, your sarcasm might be very hurtful to someone. Be aware that they might have a meltdown. If it's too much, the person might melt down. They might swear, they might shout, they might distress. That's because they've overloaded. And be aware of that. Have a quiet area for people to go into, which is actually a good idea for all of us to have a quiet area to go into. A lot of it's just common sense. Have a look at your decor. Have a look at your workspace. Is it too busy? Is it too noisy? Is it too hot? Is it too cold? Because all these things can distress people.
It's actually the similar sorts of things we were talking about a minute ago when we were talking about shops and restaurants and so on making their environment. It's the same sort of things, isn't it?
It's actually easier in an office because you can plan it around your person. And you've got your reasonable adjustments so that, you might even be able to have to make applications for access to work, for equipment or whatever that they might need to help them to do that. just think about the people and remember they might need reassurance.
Yeah. I mean, I was actually going to ask about communication, because maybe quite often with people on the spectrum, maybe they seem to others to be aloof or uninterested in talking to colleagues, or maybe they say the wrong thing. I mean, how should an employer approach that?
Well, I think you need to be making sure that the rest of the staff team are aware that the person might say things that don't seem appropriate. They might seem aloof, they're not. They actually want to be involved. They don't ignore them. They don't want to be. But it's your reasonable adjustments, isn't it? It's taking that time to explain things, realising that people might be a bit scared. Don't introduce new things just like that. They aren't going to be able to learn that new technique just like that. Or shift their rotors, we run rotor systems here, and people don't always like having their rotors changed. For a person with autism, that could be the end.
Major thing.
Major meltdown.
Yeah. I suppose autistic people will need a work environment that's well structured. Is that something particular detail to?
They know where their workstation is. It doesn't get changed. People don't come in and mess their, like my messy desk, don't come in and mess their desk. Don't move their pen.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it could be that someone likes to have their pen where their pen is, and it's not them being difficult. That is their survival technique. They have to have order to get through this world, which is attacking their sensitivity all the time.
Okay. What about feedback? I know it's desirable for an employer to provide feedback to all their staff, but I suppose it's especially important for those on the spectrum. Why is that?
Because people may be lacking in confidence, because they don't always understand how other people react to them. They might think, they didn't please. I didn't do it right. I didn't please them because they can't read your social norms. So they might often ask, "How did I do?" And they might ask that a lot, repetitively. Did I do that right? And they're basically needing reassurance. So you have to be prepared to reassure and give feedback, but honest feedback, because they expect you to be honest. Because we do get people who have gone on job placements, and at the end they've just been, the placements ended and they haven't really known why, and it's maybe because the employer has not understood that you do have to communicate in a way that gives them confidence.
Okay. I mean, autistic people are often meticulous, which of course is potentially a great strength. But I mean, we mentioned this earlier. You were talking about the journey to work where the road's closed, and that becomes a major issue. They can get stressed very easily if things go wrong. How can employers help there? You
need to be aware of what it is that causes them stress. So we're in a very hot room at the moment. So if you were on the spectrum, I would be thinking, and he's very sensitive to heat, we're going to have to get the window open. They have to be aware that people can't cope with things that other people will cope with very, very easily, like a change of colleague, a change of routine. Everything is very scary, because remember that they're struggling to understand, they're struggling to find out what it means, they're struggling to process. And, our worlds are totally chaotic. We live in chaotic worlds. They can't cope with that. So we need to, and actually being in a chaotic world is not the best place in an office anyway. So people just need to be aware of that. If they are aware of that, they'll have really good employees, because people tend to be very loyal, because they don't like change. They ain't going to go anywhere else. They're very loyal.
Yeah, it's a plus. And finally, I mean, we touched a little bit on this, is what training or guidance should employers give to other staff to help them support an autistic colleague? I
don't think colleagues expect them to be fully trained, but if they go onto the National Autistic Society website, there are some packs there they can download. There's some all sorts of ideas in there. They can work through them, and they can get a kite mark to say that they're autism friendly, which will encourage other people with autism to try to apply for jobs or use the business.
Right, that's great. That's very helpful. Thanks, Sheila.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Cumbria Chamber of Commerce podcast. You can find out more about how we're supporting Cumbrian businesses at cumbriachamber.co.uk and cumbriagrowthhub.co.uk. In the meantime, thank you very much for listening, and we'll have another episode for you next week.